Hello, Tahisha.
Hello, Melonya. How are you this morning? Whoop, whoop,
Whoop, whoop. Happy Friday.
whoop.
Welcome, folks, to MT Fridays. If you are new to our channel, my name is Melonya Johnson.
And I am Tahitia Timmons.
And every Friday, we have unscripted conversations that are helping to fill the brain drain, one unscripted conversation at a time. So, today, my topic is and it's a little, there's so much to talk about these days, but my topic is Chinese companies are forcing single people to get married and have children. And I want to just talk about, is that coming to a
You
theater
know
near
what?
you?
I
What?
just, you surprised me with that topic because I just want to say for the people listening, for anyone listening, we talked about so much and you never we talked during the week. And so that's a surprise. And once again, my face was like, what?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yes.
And so I want to talk about, in our climate right now, the move for corporations to rule us, what the future could potentially look like. What are you bringing to the table today?
Well, mine isn't as exciting or less well known as what you're bringing to the table. I'm talking about women and Women's History Month and the beautiful proclamation by, oh gosh, what is the president's name? I don't remember. Like it's not constantly thrown at us. And what he has said in the proclamation um, about Women's History Month. And tomorrow, of course, is International Women's Day. So, that's what I'm bringing to the table,
Well,
talking
let's
about that
get
stuff.
started, shall we?
Let's get this beast on the flow.
Okay, so Chinese company to single out workers. And let me just go, I'm gonna go into so what some companies are doing now, and I'm just gonna read a portion of this. This is being housed under being patriotic because China, like the United States, like Japan, like a number of countries in the world, they are experiencing population declines, and they're really nervous about it. And it's really kind of ironic. Some people may not remember that China used to have a one child rule. That people could have only one child. And women, I believe, were forced to get abortions and whatnot. And they certainly didn't want uh, girls, females, right? And so it's ironic that some decades later now, they are trying to coerce people into having, children. And so there's one company, uh, the Shandong Shantian Chemical Group, sent to email message to unmarried employees recently in a notice that spread widely on social media. It instructed them to start families by September 30th or else. If you cannot get married and start a family within 3 quarters, the company will terminate your labor contract, the memo said.
Ah.
And so this is something that has happened with other companies as well, and there is some pushback. But right now we're really seeing the rise of the corporate class. Right? We talk about the oligarchy. We talk about um, I think some years ago there was a vote to make corporations people, right? Give them, human rights, so to speak. And so I wonder if this, because everything that we do is, I think there's a move to tie everything that we do to our work. Your healthcare is you can only get it through work. Your insurances, your livelihoods, and so I wonder how invasive corporations will be. in the United States, moving forward.
They're already very invasive, right? Like, they own a good piece of your life, and we see that not and I'll just say employers, not corporations for this example, but most of us in the United States or around the world are afraid to even speak about certain things that we feel passionate about or are part of our lives because we're afraid of the impact it would have on being employed. We are so controlled by the employee system that we don't actually get what we need our entire lives because we are silent, because we don't want to be seen as unemployable. And that's a weird way to live a life. No other animal, and we are animals, lives with the amount of stress that we live with simply to be able to live life because everything is bought and sold in this world that we live in.
Well, I'm gonna push back on that. I think animals in the wild live under a lot of stress because if you don't hunt it and eat it, you don't eat, or if you don't graze and you don't eat, life is, in and of itself is stress. Much of our stress is man-made, though. It's not.
Oh yeah.
It's man-made, and I the technological class here that is really ruling our country right now really treats we are in a portion of our history where we have rolled back protections from corporations, right? And this opens the door to you're absolutely going to see more corruption. You're absolutely going to see some really unreasonable things. When you stop to think about some of the protections that we have, right? The 5-day work week, right? That came about because people were worked to death. Rules that Republicans some time ago started trying to chip away with protections of children in the workplace.
Working age, yeah.
You
We're
know,
yeah.
right? And so, okay, you see those protections eroding, and as corporations gain more political power and even just more power in our lives today. For those who might not know, today is the continuation of the economic boycott. Amazon is being boycotted from today, the 7th to the 14th. I'm boycotting them forever. But that being said, we have these corporations have embedded themselves in our lives. During COVID, I was shopping at Amazon, knowing, wow, some people are going to have to be in close proximity to each other to get me this stupid little thing that I'm ordering, right? But these corporations have become so embedded in our lives, and I wonder again, there is a push around the world for women to have children, right? And we can see our autonomy, our rights to our bodies in this country evaporating. But because rich folks don't, they have built an infrastructure that is supposed to support a certain amount of people that keeps certain amounts of revenue going to them. And so that is a big push in terms of getting, having children. And I just wonder, is this our future? Is this coming to us, to like I said, to a theater near you?
Well, and it's already here. So I would say that this is already here. Um, Now we might not necessarily have and maybe there's companies that have set messages encouraging people to have kids. I don't know. But we have seen messaging around a return to traditional family values, right? Like and I go back, like you and I have had conversations about parents staying home and like, that it is important to raise kids with support and with love, and that does involve addressing, parents that are working and who actually is watching the kids, right? So, but I find it interesting with China that they're mandating in 3 months you have to go and find someone to marry, or not. Let me correct that. China is not mandating this, but that there's some Chinese companies that are saying that. I want to be clear that I did not say that China is mandating this. But the 3-month thing is an interesting target because that means you're going to find someone, right? Um, Fall in love. No, it's going to be a transaction. So, because I can't imagine that you're going to find someone that you're going to have enough of a love or like for that you're going to want to marry them. Then do they want you to be pregnant, or do they want to just have proof that you're working on making a baby? I didn't read this article. Or is it just like, I got to get married within that 3 months and say, hey, we're on the plan to making babies? Because the fertility rate for human beings overall is shifting. There are much more rates of infertility, and much of this has to do with something that corporations don't want to acknowledge, right? Because it's climate change. Our climate is changing and our fertility rates are going down. And this is not just a women's issue, it's a male issue too, because we know that men bring 50% of the genetic material, and all of us overall are having fertility issues. So, in 3 months, in a world that has, fertility issues, we're going to mandate that you have to be like baby on board. And how are you going to, like, this just sounds like a recipe for transactional relationships, which then brings the thought of, are we going to create is this what our future is? Everything is a transaction. I need to keep my job. So, guess what, Bob? Let's get married and we'll have one kid because I need to keep my labor contract. So, that's our agreement. We don't like each other. You don't like me. I don't like you, but I like having a job. Like, this doesn't sound like the recipe for collaborative communities or community. It sounds like we want to take something called love and we want to turn it into something very transactional, which we've been trying to do for quite some time. And I like to say love, but maybe relationships aren't love. Maybe there is no love, and maybe that's why we are so unhappy. But to put a timeline of 3 months, like,
Yeah, it says last year 6.1 million Chinese couples got married, a 20% decline from a year earlier, and the fewest since the government began releasing statistics in 1986. The authorities have been trying to reverse those trends. Officials have visited women at home to ask whether they plan to get pregnant, published propaganda claiming that pregnancy make women smarter, and call for creating a fertility-friendly social atmosphere, including workplaces. I just, what I find is really, I think what is so interesting, and I think it's in South Korea, and I talked about this not very long ago. There's this movement where young women are opting out of the dating. They're just not. They're not dating. They're not marrying. They're not having sex. They're not doing anything. And I think that one of the things that women have a responsibility when bringing a child into this world, to bring it into a world that is
not just, no, we're going to fight again.
no.
Not just women.
No. Can I finish my
Okay.
statement?
Yes, you
I
can.
think because women bear life, they have a responsibility to make certain that when they make the decision to have a child, that it is in an optimal environment. And I don't think around this world we are creating, there's a few countries, Scandinavian countries stand out. There's a few countries that make it optimal for a woman to make that kind of decision. If they are working women, they have sufficient time off to tend to their child, or the father as well. They have more supportive um, uh, uh, options for people who are parents. They have health systems that support them.
They don't make you go back to work 3 months or a month after having a
Mm.
child. Uh,
They have
at
they have education
they
that's
have a
full.
longer, family leave. They have paternity leave, right? Like
Yeah,
fathers can support. So they have a different support system. They have child care that isn't as expensive as child care here in the US. We are, we're
they have
fighting
a
to
health
keep
system. They have a health
they have
system.
an encouraging health system while as we're here trying to keep Head Start programs,
Right.
right? So like we have
They have an
nothing.
education system.
Mhm.
They have, so through every facet of this child's life, they have clean food, right? Not food that is filled with pesticides and all sorts of. They have healthier lifestyles, right? They have a balance between work and family, right? I mean, they live the values of creating a good environment in which to live. And I think if more women had those kinds of supportive environments, they might decide it's safe to have children, because nothing makes a woman more vulnerable than to be pregnant and to then have a child. Because in most cases, the children, if a relationship doesn't work, the children stay with the mother, and that puts a big burden on her. So that's a really big decision for women to make. And
It
I think that we create a hostile environment that doesn't protect women, doesn't protect children. You can send your children to school here and they could not come back home.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Women traditionally have raised children or been the ones who end up with a child because historically, if you look at like all the way back in the day, um, men could get a woman pregnant and didn't necessarily have to stay. The same thing happens now, but during incidents of war and stuff, women were sort of the spoils of war, right? So there's this idea that we women are property that has been propagated throughout history through just war conflicts and how we're talked about even today as even some of the rhetoric you see in some of the dialogue about having kids, right? It's aimed towards, this is going to make you happy. This is what you're meant to do as a woman. This is going to make you better as a woman to have children. But we don't talk about that for men as much. Men's health is just as important when it comes to having babies. If you have a child with someone who genetically has a poor genetic profile, all of those things will carry over into your child, right? So 50%, we're talking about that 50-50 share. If they're unhealthy and they have diabetes and they have all these issues, that also comes along. But nowhere in our time, like nowhere have women said, you know what, I did have a baby, but you're the father of this baby. And I think you should raise this child. Like that doesn't really happen, right? Like we
Seldom.
don't it seldom happens. We
Mhm.
don't encourage boys as they're growing up to think, if you go out and you get someone pregnant, I want you to realize that you are going to raise that child for the rest of your life. We don't teach boys how to parent in the same way, even though we do a little bit better now than we did when you and I were coming up, in talking about like, be careful with the baby and you're going to hold the baby. You see more boys kind of holding younger siblings and things like that, and watching mom parent and being a participant of that, versus years ago when there was this book, William Wants a Doll, I think it was called, and it was shocking because the kid, I think it's from the 70s, I think. It might even be older than that. But he wants a doll and his father won't let him get the doll, or he's very upset because why should a boy want a doll? And they're kind of explaining because he wants to be caring. He wants to learn how to parent. He wants to, he sees it as like, I why can't I have a doll to raise? Because, there's two there's two, and we're talking traditional heteronormative, value, like when you're having kids. But if you're thinking male and female, there's two people in that situation. And why don't we talk about like, hey, guys, yeah, we might have a falling birth rate, but are we getting men ready to be parents too? Because I would love to see more girls who are not more teenage pregnancy. I'm not saying that. But I would like us to be more open to the idea there's two parents, there were two bios involved in that. Like boys have just as much responsibility to raise those children and should consider themselves just as responsible to do that. I and maybe then we'll see some different legislation. Like single dads have called for things and gotten things passed and pushed, um, more than sometimes women have, because men's voices get listened to. Like, I'm not saying I want to see more single dads. I don't want to see any more single parents. But the concept of, yeah, if you're really a dad, you could end up being a single dad, right? Like, own that. Like, why are we not really supporting parenting for both genders? Like, this is the disservice that's saying that women should be the ones thinking about, well, is it a child friendly world? Men should be thinking about, is it a child friendly world too? Because what happens if we do walk away from the raising of children and say, you know what? I do want a career. I do want to do these things. And we have a society that doesn't support that type of life. So where you might have been able to have your career and carry on and do things because you expected that females should just go around raising children. No, we both have a responsibility to do that. I wonder what Elon Musk's like life would be like if he was raising all 14, I think now, of those children. What would his life be like if he was the person responsible to do the active parenting of that child? Of those children. Sorry, not just one child. Like how, because uh, there there are so many ways we could have more supportive communities when it comes to parenting, and ignoring the fact that men are viewed as not having as much skin in the game as women is one of the big disservices I think we do as a
And
society.
and I think that's another reason why, younger women are opting not to have children because um because it's a lot of work. Being a parent is just a lot of work, period. That's I mean, that's just it. I was a foster parent for three siblings once for a few weeks, and I thought that it was going to kill me. Um, there was an 8 month old, a 7 year old, and a 10 year old, something in that age group, and I was like, these children are going to kill me. They're going to be the death of me. And the little boy was sick, and then I got sick, and then I felt lonely because my friends' children were older, right? So it's not like we could have play dates, right? And so I was like, oh my god, how do people do this? And the only conversations you have are with with little people. I was bored out of my mind. I was like, this is so freaking boring. I was like, good lord. I could not wait for those children to go. I mean, I'm being honest. I mean, they, you know what? But they were.
You know,
I'm
this is
being,
very this
huh?
is very funny because, like, I think there's this thought in society that women are just like we have some like magical internal biological thing that makes us love children. Like, oh my God, kids, I love them. Bring on all the babies. Like, that is not necessary. Like, that is something socialized, right? Like, you're told, like, oh, look at the baby. You should love the babies. Like, here's the baby doll, hold the baby. Like, pretend you're feeding a baby, pretend you're doing this. Let's pretend you're cleaning and cooking. Like, there's so much household toys out there. It's like you're socialized from birth to death that you should just be out there like, oh, and now I'm a grandma, and now I'm a mom, and like I'm an auntie. Like, whereas uncles, right? Like, there used to be this like ugly uncle myth, right? Like don't go near unc. Like, he's a weird. Like, men don't have those same like, if you're ever in danger, go find a father. People don't say that. They're like go find a man, right? Like, we tell kids, if you're lost, go find a policeman or a mother or
Yeah.
a woman, like any woman, like just any woman is better than any man, right? That's not necessarily true.
But it's a difficult job, right? And parenting is a very difficult job.
It is.
And we have to really be very careful with what is being legislated, what is coming out of Project 2025. You know, there has been talk about, well, you know, they have the SAVE Act, which makes it more difficult for women, transgender individuals, and people who have had name changes to vote, right? But there's also a little some whisperings about giving women who have children more votes. Like, you get to vote for every child that you have, right? You get to cast a vote. See, these are the kinds of things, and so we have to really look at it, and you have to really you've got to really think about what is behind this push for us to have more children, because the reality of it is that we're an overpopulated planet. We produce tons and tons and tons of garbage that pollutes our environment. The world would benefit from not having at so many people, but yet and still there is this push to take women's rights away. When was it Roe versus Wade? No, what was it? What was it that removed the right for a woman to have an abortion? What was that?
Now you gotta quiz
It
me.
begins with a D, right?
It's someone tell us in the comments. Anyone who's listening.
It'll come to me. But anyway, when the
Yeah.
Supreme Court voted against that, the next thing that out of Clarence Thomas's mouth was, well, maybe next is birth control, right?
Yeah.
So we all, both men and women, have to be really suspicious as to why is there this push around the world to keep the population. Like I said, we would benefit from not
Well,
having as many cars on the road, and not so many people infringing on
because they
on
want to feed
hmm,
they want to feed the corporate machine, right?
right.
Because every person brought into this world too is another person who can buy your products. It's another person who you can sell to. It's another person that has to be taken care of. And now you really locked in the structure supporting this person to buy more stuff. Like, now they really have to work, right? Like, if I didn't have children, I might try to like hustle here and like, maybe like live outside the confines of society because it's just me. Like I've only got my own skin in the game. Once you get kids, there is this sort of like, okay, now I have to think about someone else, how I'm going to
Bondage.
provide for them. Yeah, now I'm in, I'm in, I'm, I'm in resentful bondage to this company because like I can't just cut out. Like, because I can't be hitchhiking with a small child on my hip. That would be completely irresponsible.
But isn't
Like,
it? And I'm
so
like,
they've trapped us. But I will say, and so for those who don't know, I was married at one point and I have two wonderful, lovely adult children and I adore them. But one of the things that terrified my ex when we were going through our separation and divorce, and terrified my parents, to be honest, except for my father, was I said at one point, I was like, because I'm doing the math of like, can we survive? And I said, you know what? I think I'll get an apartment and you can have the kids and raise the kids in the house. And then everything shifted.
mm,
Because and I'm gonna air my dirty laundry. Ready? He was having an affair and he had a girlfriend. And everything shifted because he thought he was gonna go off and like, I'm running in the woods with my girl. Oh, like, he thought it was gonna be like that. And I was like, yeah, I don't know if this is what I want. Like, I love my kids, but you are also their parent and they love you too. And he was like, "Well, how could I can't rate well, I can't." And we had a new baby. And when I say new, 2 weeks old,
wow.
right? Like baby was young. My son was young back then. And he was like, I can't do that. How am I going to do that? And then also the girlfriend was like, whoa, 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 whoa. I didn't know you were. I, I thought we were going to be running in the woods together, freely going, and. But my mother said to me, she said, "A man can't raise what are you thinking? A man can't raise a child." And I said, "If a man can make a child, a man can raise a child. Why should women be indentured fiscally?" Because I ran the numbers and like this, like it is a stop in your career. It is and we tell people that if the goal is to work, right, then really if you make more money than the other person, then they should take the child, right? Like if you're looking at straight old numbers and who should stay home, then maybe it's the guy who stays home. Maybe if it's a divorce situation or a separation, maybe they're the one that, is raising the kids and maybe you're sending them child support. However, a lot of guys push back on that because they are not prepared. None of us are really prepared to be parents, but guys get less preparation and are told and this is shifting and changing. And I think COVID really helped people to start thinking like, hey, like we need to educate boys a little bit more around this. But there still is this pushback when women don't want to raise children and it's their own children. Well, what kind of mother doesn't want to raise her children? Why doesn't she have her kids? Oh, she must be bad. What does she do? Oh, she must be the worst thing if she's not parenting her kids. I worked with a couple of nurse leaders in my career who were separated or divorced from their exes, and their exes had their kids and were raising their kids. And I remember there was always this gossip of, oh, she's hard. She's not a real lady. She don't even have her kids. Like, what is that? We never say that about guys. We never say to guys who are single fathers and don't have primary custody or are the primary parent and have them we don't say to them, so what's wrong with you? Why don't you have custody of a child? Why aren't you the primary parent? So
No,
what kind of bad person are you?
It's absolutely there is absolutely a stigma. I'm gonna turn over to your topic, but I think it's just I think there's a lot to think about, and just one more statement regarding this. Now we do live in a transactional world, right? We do know, and we're seeing it now today. Corporations, businesses are laying people off. So you have a company that tells you you got 3 months to get married and have a kid, and then there's a blip in and how much the revenues are, and now you're unemployed, right? Because but your company told you that you weren't patriotic unless you did this for your country. We have to be very, very careful that that we do not allow corporations to dictate who we are and how we live our lives. So let's talk about this proclamation. I'm going to try to keep a neutral face as you read this.
So before we talk about that, just because you said, like, how much does it cost to raise a kid? I was curious, and so I looked real quick. And so it looks like uh when adjusted for inflation, the number jumps to 202 as of March 2024,
That's
based
another
on
race.
data. So my question would be, if it and that's in a middle class home, right? That's the middle class home was also the goal and aim for Americans, right? Like, you wanted to have the white picket fence and the middle class home. So if that's the aim, if that's the cost for raising children, I would say that I hope that company, if this were to come in the US, would then guarantee you, if they lay you off and don't keep you employed for 18 years, which is what we say is the time to to raise kids, I hope they give you $300,000.
Mm.
Like, like, I'm sorry we couldn't keep you in employ, but here's $300,000 so that that child we made you have can still have a good life, and
You
that would be in the US.
You bring
Um,
up a very good point. And in terms of talking about even again talking about creating an environment that's optimal for children, the cost of having children, right? So especially now when you're looking at younger generations coming up, that and this is worldwide. This is not just in the United States. Finding a home, right? Because we were that individualism kind of thing. We're taught you have to get your own home, right? Well, that's priced out of the market for people, right? And for some young people, they're like, I can't afford to have children. I cannot. And so, I mean, there's some things that on a societal basis, we could, if we wanted to, make some changes. And
we
maybe this
definitely
is the
could.
time to do that in the United States.
In a time of chaos, this is the best time to have some change. We're all kind of getting used to what it feels like to wake up in the sense of, like, uncanny valley. What is going on? My brain feels inundated with stuff. Let's start actually throwing out some positive things that are change creators, and really think about, like, how could we live as collaborative communities? In the 60s and 70s and 50s, we saw an uptick of people living in communal groups, communes. I don't want to put, like, commune has
Community.
become
Let's
community.
just
It's
call it
become
community.
such a dirty word, right? But in these very, you found a group of people, you identified with their ethics and principles and goals and what they wanted to do, and you lived in community with them in collaborative practice. You shared things. We know there's communities out there that do this, and do very well. I'll throw this out: if you had 5 families who chose to buy a property that could also have some farming ability to it, and they all lived on this property, right? And they all shared resources, including utilities, internet, even shared clothing, exchange clothing for the children, right? Now we're I'm being Amish, but your costs go way down. Like, imagine if you only had one Netflix subscription, you only had one, like, Verizon, but it was the family plan for 5 families. Like, the cost is just it's going down, it's going we're sharing, and we're learning how to share. It's and when you learn how to share, magic happens. When you learn how to, like, pause and wait and not think of yourself as the priority in something, your brain grows. That's where our cognitive growth happens. So I'll throw out this idea of 5, like, maybe not even 5 families, but if you had 3 families who got together and decided, you know what, let's pool our resources. Let's just buy a piece of land. So where I am, I think the average price of a house, and this is I'm in New Jersey. I don't know if I should have said that, but I'm in New Jersey, and the average cost of a house, I want to say, is like 2 or 3. So if we take 300 and you've got 3 families, you are then talking about what, $900,000 to get in some place for those 3 families. That's what they're spending. So for $500,000, you might be able to buy a piece of property that has 5 acres or more and build on that property and build a site of community that supports the way that you want to live. You might be able to create on that property a sense of uh such warmth and love that when your child goes out to play, you're not afraid because you know guess what? There's like 6 other adults who are just in the general area. And that's what I think we want to get back to, right? Like that's where we're thinking in our heads. Like we are thinking about and I'm going to say the words make America great again, right? So he was able to pitch that because when the time period he's talking about, he's really talking about a community, right? Where people could go out and they weren't afraid. But that's community. Knowing your neighbor
Well,
makes you
some
less
some people
afraid.
could go out and not be afraid.
Well, yes, but he's talking about this thought of like this is what neighborhoods and communities are like. So there's nothing that says that we can't create that without the other piece. Like there's nothing that says that you can't get together with people and say, hey, you know what, everything's crazy expensive. Let's share. Let's buy a piece of property. Let's raise our own damn chickens. Let's get a goat. Those baby goats are so cute. And then you're not talking about on the internet, I'm paying $26 for eggs. You have a whole other issue going on with chickens and eggs and goats. But we don't think that way because we're not encouraged to think that way. What we're encouraged to think about is like, how can I get a whole bunch of money and be on my own, this hyper individualism, and get out there. And I know I haven't talked on my thing, but my thing is about women's health, women's
History.
History Month. And so this is a part of that because Women's History Month was really to acknowledge the activists and leaders and those who have taken us this far when we look at women in history. And so this is this is part of something that we should really be thinking about as women. What kind of communities do we want to live in, and does the coming systems and does our future look like it embodies the type of communities we want? And if it doesn't, while we still have access to power, how are we going to shape that? Like, how are we going to build our own communities? We often think we have to live in these planned townships and we have to accept the way that society is going. We don't. We can shift away from that. And we can create our own areas where we feel prosperous and safe.
I'm really hoping, and I'm a big advocate right now in terms of just having some measure of control in a very t- uh, time of severe turmoil, that being able to have economic control, to be able to not spend your money unless it's an essential. And that's the way I'm looking at it. If it's not gas for my car, and if it's not food to eat, I'm not buying anything. And I think if we can psychologically unplug from our consumerist mindsets, it opens the door for us to do things differently. And again, I always I've referenced this a lot. The century of the self, how we became consumers. There's a BBC documentary, and I encourage anyone to go see the whole thing. It's a few hours long, this documentary, but it tracks how Sigmund Freud's nephew used the work of Sigmund Freud, working with the subconscious, and used that in towards marketing, and how he coined it was the first to coin the term public relations. He first did his work as a propagandist for, I think it was the First World War, or the second, maybe the first. No, it was probably the. I can't remember. It's the First World War, but one of the World One or Two, whatever it was. But then transferred after that, and companies hired him and to promote their products, and it's all based on this. That there was that saying, keeping up with the Joneses, right? Oh, you see a new car in your neighbor's driveway, now you want to have a new car, right? And it's that consumer mindset. And if anything, I'm hoping that enough people adopt these boycotts and then realize, again, just like you said, well, so and so, my kid has outgrown his pants. He's got, well, hey, I've got some pants. Right now, we're not putting, and you take those pants, right, that you have, and you give them to somebody else, and you take somebody else's pants, and now we've got less things in landfills, right? We're cleaning up our planet. We're not consuming mindlessly, and it gives us some space when we're not trying to keep up with things. And like you said, that shared community, those shared costs. Now, I don't have to be owned by the corporations.
And, we didn't even talk about the fact that you can share transportation, the
Yes, you
use of
can.
cars. Like, I will say, I don't drive my car a lot. So it sits most days. But if I was in a collaborative community and my car was part of that, that car then also becomes a part of the resources, because we are at a point where, items are becoming very expensive. And I use the analogy of 300,000 per house, right? But that is only the listing price. That does not include the mortgage insurance that most people don't have 300,000 to drop down, so they take out mortgages. Doesn't include the mortgage. It doesn't include any of the insurance. So you may, at the end of the day, by the time you pay off a 30-year mortgage, have paid more, closer to like maybe 700,000 for that house. So times that times 3, and imagine what you're saving. So, I do think collaborative communities are so important. I do want to do one. I talk with you about that all the time, because I think it is the only way that for people who are Black and brown bodies, LGBT communities, those who are considered outside of the traditional group. I think that it is time for us to start uniting together, join forces, and create communities of protection for ourselves. Because I think that this is going to be very important. And I might not even get to my thing, because I feel like this is also so very important. But I also do feel, and my mother is going to wince, while you can and while we can, before this is taken away, I do think people should be buying
Considering
guns,
that
considering firearms.
they should consider how they're going to protect
Yeah.
themselves.
Consider how you're going to protect yourself. You can also buy tasers and things like that. As a good friend told me, he's like, you can get other things. But if you're going to live in these collaborative communities, you probably do want to have something that's going to protect you in some way. And also, it's to, we say that we're a country that loves firearms, right? But we're a country that loves firearms when bought by certain people. I would love to test whether we're a country that loves firearms when bought by Black and brown bodies and women. I don't think we love them that much. Because then, one of the things that has been talked about is how, like, a certain group in our country probably has the ability to be a little militia and army themselves. Well, we never say that about the other group, right? Why is that? I'm sure, not that I want us to have conflict in that way. But I was going to talk about the announcement for Women's History Month. And the reason why I figured I would talk about this is because there's been a lot of conversation about how DEI is going away, and that these diversity topics like Women's History, Black History Month, AAPI History Month, that those things are no longer going to be supported by our federal government. That is not true. Okay. He's still issuing these acknowledgments of the months. In fact, March is, he also addressed Irish American History
You're
Month.
going to have to temper that when you say that is not true.
Well, it's not true that he has canceled those months.
Let's be clear. Let's be clear. You're talking about performative bullshit. So go on. Because the executive orders speak to something very different. So tell me about the performative bullshit that they're doing.
So what I want to point out with his acknowledgement of Women's History Month is that it is crafted much differently than previous acknowledgments of Women's History Month. And the reason why I say that is that and I have it up on my screen, but I'm not sharing it. Should I share it? I don't even know. You figured out how to do that earlier than I did. But it is basically,
okay.
Oh, look at you helping me. I'm going to do a screen share of this. Bloop. Okay. Yay. You're the best. So this is the proclamation, White House proclamation from President Donald J. Trump on Women's History Month. And so here it is. And he starts out, every day without fame or fanfare, women inspire, support, and strengthen their families, communities, and our country. Women's History Month presents a great opportunity to celebrate the tremendous impact women continue to have on our nation. Now, what's interesting about this particular declaration is that a lot of what he talks about in the declaration is his agenda, which is the elimination of transgender rights and migrants, which is very different than what other announcements have talked about. And other announcements have talked about, the great women in history who have moved us forward through their activism. This is really an announcement propagating more of this negative, we don't like DEI stuff. Because then he goes on to talk about how he basically doesn't name any women. There's no woman named in this entire acknowledgement. He doesn't even name his wife with an actual name. She's just, the first lady, right? So, and he doesn't name anybody in his administration. They're just female trailblazers in his administration because he probably doesn't know their names. But it's very, very different than other acknowledgments, because then he goes on to say, no longer will our government promote radical ideologies. I have not, like, when was the last time something about women's history included a propaganda push about how you're going to change America? So that's why this was on my agenda as a topic. This is very different than other like announcements for Women's History Month, because he talks about all of his things that he's pushing with those executive orders. So that's why I wanted to talk about the fact that, he said that many people have said these things are going away, and they are shifting how they're talking about women's history in training, like in the military. They're no longer acknowledging many of the women who had been real trailblazers. What he's talking about is he's talking more about men in this announcement for Women's History than anything else. As you're seeing this, are you not like, he's talking about markers? Let's talk. This isn't Women's History Month. This isn't a Women's History Month announcement. This is
So
one more announcement of propaganda for your executive orders.
So that's again, that's why I said when you said, well, it's not going away, that's not true. It is going away. It is being destroyed. This is, he put something up which was performative. Okay, like they had some. I didn't even follow it. They had some sort of Black History Month celebration at the White House, and I'm like, what kind of performative bullshit is this? Because we all know that you are, you're racist and you're fascist, and that that you don't like Black people, right? And so you're doing this for what? Who is that performance for? Don't know. It certainly wasn't for me. It didn't make me look at them and go, oh, maybe I was looking at them the wrong way. No, I see them for who they are. And so in this, they had to do something or felt, to try to have some semblance of normalcy. But we know that the goal is to take away women's rights,
Yes.
right?
And what's interesting is that in a women's history, the announcement that we're acknowledging women's history, he talks very little about history and he talks more about the propaganda and his executive orders. And the thing, and what I would like to also point out, he spends a lot of time talking about this ban on transgender in society, right? That's not women's history. I'm not saying that, and I want to be clear, transgender women are part of our history, and they have been some of the activists that have, pushed us forward in society. But this whole piece has nothing to do with women's history. He's talking about like this as, here's what's important, and I'm not going to speak to what's important to all women, but what's important for women is protecting our access to healthcare, for women to be able to get to get medical treatment without it being based mostly on men's bodies, right? So that's what women care about. He's not addressing any of the issues with disparities in healthcare. He's not addressing any of the birth uh, mortality, and the mortality for Black women, which is still at an all-time high. Would love, if you're going to talk about things that you're actively doing versus women's history, let's talk about how are you going to help with the mortality of Black women who are giving birth, right? Like, how are you going to help with that? You don't care about that. How are you going to help women to move into STEM fields? We've been moving into STEM fields, and we're one of we're women are now much more educated than men when it comes to going to college. How are you going to talk about addressing that and supporting women in technology and making them feel safe in technology fields where many of the discrimination lawsuits came out of, right? The tech and discrimination against women. How are you going to bring them to the table? He doesn't talk about that. Those are real women's issues. He doesn't talk about childcare and how are you going to support women in the workplace. He talks about something different. He praises and acknowledges that he's delivering on his promise of securing the borders. I don't think as a woman thinking about women's history, I've ever thought, wow, you know what I wish? I wish I could just shore up those borders for Women's History Month. That has never popped in my mind, yet it's a part of this Women's History Month announcement. And this is also a little bit of what you were talking about when we talk about marketing and like how do you quietly get people to believe in propaganda? You embed it everywhere. So this propaganda is embedded in this Women's History Month announcement. It has nothing to do with us. Like, when was the last time you thought borders and women's history?
Never.
My never. Never. So why is this in here? Or did whoever wrote this not know anything about women's history and they
Can
didn't want to
I
look
ask you
anything
this?
up?
Because there's one of those FAFO videos out there, and it's of this woman who voted for him because of in vitro fertilization. And I know we're almost at the hour, but I thought to myself, because at some point there was talk about not allowing in vitro fertilization, and then some things shifted or whatever. But have women typically not had access? I mean, I know it's expensive. So, because I see here it says something about improved access to in vitro fertilization, right? It is the one, two, three, fourth paragraph from the bottom. And I'm like, in what way are they trying to? Are they going to do something to help women in that area, or is that just buzzwords?
I think that's a lot of buzzwords because the in vitro fertilization piece was a part of reform prior to this. And it's more about so and in vitro fertilization is it is an interesting topic because part of the new growth in medicine and new growth in products is fertilization, fertility products, right? So there are giant centers popping up because of the fertility issues that we're having in the world. But the other piece that's coming out of this is that we have been forgetful about the fact that 50% of that DNA comes from men. So it is a male issue too, because when women can't carry a child full term, often the issue is men, the male component that came with that. Men are often responsible for miscarriages, and we don't talk about that enough. But the in vitro piece that he's talking about is it wasn't always covered by insurance, and so all of that out of pocket and all of the testing and all of those things were borne by like really the burden of the private citizen. However, infertility is at such a high that it's trickled down to every group. So if you want to get your base to support you, you're going to talk about the fact that you're going to help them to get access to having children. Now, one of the biggest things that can help you to get pregnant is to be less stressed, both male and female. We see counts go up when it comes to sperm motility when we are less stressed, when we eat better. Stress is a huge impactor of our lives. We know that stress brings on early periods, right? Like it makes our cycles irregular. So the less stressed we could be as a nation, the better we would be fertility wise with less costs. But yeah, he's probably doing something with in vitro. It was already a part of the package when it comes to like I believe he's probably talking about what Medicaid might reimburse for or what
What?
is allow
Now,
the in vitro piece. Yeah.
well, we know that's nonsense
Well,
because
because that's going away. So
right. So it's
that's
like
true.
like what is this? Nothing. It's a
So
nothing
it's a
burger.
lot of nothing. There's some other stuff in here that's nothing. And he's only just started. That's what I will never stop fighting for America's women and families. But he doesn't know the names of any of America's women. So there's not a single woman's name in this, which is what I found like just like you couldn't find any woman. Oh, because the women in history, they were like, if you look at the women in history, it's protesters. They're fighting the man. So don't name those women, right? So it's fascinating how this one was laid out. He doesn't even name the first lady. She's just the first lady. So he didn't even give her a name in this.
Yeah.
Not a single name. Not a single name.
Mm.
At least in the Black History one, which also is triggering to me because he says he lowercases the word black. He uses lowercase. It's black whenever he talks about black Americans, America, capital letter. But at least he threw in some names of actual historical figures. Um, but we didn't get that. Women didn't get that. We didn't even get some name acknowledgement.
Mhm.
So
We're
I'm
gonna
going to give this one a thumbs down
we're gonna
for
protect
a
you whether you like it or not.
yes. He does put that in there. He's going to
Oh,
protect you.
really?
Yeah. And he talks about, the gender extremism, which gender extremism, that's not a part of women's history, right? Like that should not be in this announcement. So I don't know who wrote this for you, Trumpy. You're probably your press secretary, maybe. But as your wife would say, do better, do best, be best. This is not be best. This is not be best. And I don't want to bully him over this because that's not who I am, but I think they could have done this much differently.
All right. Well, with
Yeah.
that
I'll
being
stop
said,
saying.
yeah. With that being said, I mean, really.
But I know that you think that I often have rosy glasses on and have like a lot of tolerance for this stuff. But and yeah, I'm not saying this is not performative. I wanted to actually call out the performativeness of this. And when I said he's not canceling it, I just meant he's not canceling like the nation announces it's Women's History Month. The what the nation what's behind, like what he's not saying is the nation announces it's Women's History Month, but don't hire any women, because like if you have any programs that are actively supporting women at work, you need to get rid of those, because those would be DEI programs. If you have any supplier diversity programs that encourage working with women owned businesses, you can't have those either. If you have state initiatives that talk about advantages for women in business, right? Like we always hear that, that's a DEI thing. You better get rid of that. So, yeah, he's not getting rid of Women's History Month, but he's also not helping it
Mm.
in any significant, wonderful way that would actually help women.
No. And on that note, and I would expect nothing different, right? I mean, let's be honest, I'd expect nothing different. Well, it has been a pleasure meeting with you today on our Friday chats, filling the brain drain, one unscripted conversation at a time. Folks, come back, visit us next Friday for another episode of MT Friday. See you, Tahitia.
Yes. Oh, and one more thing. Tomorrow is International Women's History Day. International Women's Day. Don't forget Amazon boycott, right? Melonya, do you have anything going on this week you want to promote on any of your networks?
Well, you know what? Well, I am working, and I'm going to talk to you about that off script, offline. But I am putting together a little talk for women cancer survivors. Yeah, isn't that fun?
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, not fun, but you know what I
Ah,
mean. I'm just,
I know what you made.
yeah,
I
I'm
know what
like
you mean.
excited about that. So I'm working. That's one of the things that I'm working on. And always come see me on Wednesdays with the Sovereignty Sage, my
Sovereignty.
podcast for women empowerment.
Yeah. I have something on Thursday on sensitivity reviews in healthcare and language. So go find that. If there's still tickets available, register for that. We're going to have a discussion, an intimate discussion on how to look for sort of like your triggering language, much like we just did with that document, and how we can make it better in healthcare. Like what things might you not want to put in your patient ad or your student ad, like maybe things like not saying the blacks, they're getting hypertension at higher rates, or always using certain pieces of language like patient identity versus person identity versus we'll talk about all those different things. So anywho,
And just on one note, while some corporations are moving away from DEI because they were performative to begin with, understand that there is, outside of the moral case for having a equitable and safe environment for all employees, right? There is also the business case that more diverse companies that actually live the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion actually have higher revenue generations. They create new markets. They're more innovative. So regardless of what is going on out in the world, understanding, being able to know how you are putting that information out, how you are marketing, how you are looking at providing services, how you are doing business. To have that lens is still an advantage, regardless of the propaganda that is out there. So,
Yes,
congratulations to
100%.
you. That's awesome.
Oh, thank you. And
Yeah.
I just want to add to that, like, it is the stress and the conflict sometimes of working with people who are different than us that help us to grow and also help us to think about the projects we're on differently. Um, and Apple is not moving away from DEI, right? Because it's been very profitable for them. It's helped them to see flaws in their products. And like companies that do well and thrive through hard times often look diverse in their leadership, in their ideas. And diversity is not just racial diversity, it is gender diversity and cognitive diversity. And I'll throw that in there, and ethnic diversity. You can't anticipate how the market will go if you don't have knowledge of different things influencing the market. You only have your own siloed perspective. So at the end of the day, I think, probably a lot of stuff that's going on now will be things that we have to rebuy, re-employing people at federal level and all of those things. But yeah, like this stuff matters. It really does
Right.
matter.
It
Um,
does.
and it's not really going away in smart organizations.
Right.
Um, I love you. This
Love
was
you
wonderful.
too.
We went way over, but that's okay.
That's all right. See you next
Thanks
Friday.
for
MC
joining us
Next
on
Friday.
Friday.
MT Fridays. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to like, subscribe, and share for more insightful discussions every Friday. Remember, the brain drain stops here, so keep the conversation going by connecting with us on social media or visiting our website. Until next time, stay curious and keep filling your mind with knowledge. See you next week, Friday, on MT Fridays.